The storm raged over the land, lightning slicing through the dark clouds, as if the gods themselves were waging war. In a small, fortified village on the banks of the Rhine, a baby's cry pierced the night. This was no ordinary child. His name would echo through the ages, and his lineage would shape the destiny of a kingdom. The Franks, a fierce and warlike people, had roamed the lands around the Rhine for generations. They were not a single tribe, but a confederation of many, united by a common desire for power and land. The name Frank was a recent one, first mentioned in Roman records around the year 300, but it quickly became a symbol of strength and unity. In the mid-5th century, a king named Clodio reigned over the Franks. He was a skilled warrior and a cunning leader, known for his ability to outmaneuver his enemies. Clodio's fortress, Dispargum, stood as a testament to his power, its walls strong and its defenders fierce. From this stronghold, he launched raids and campaigns, expanding his territory and pushing the Roman borders back. But Clodio was not the only king of the Franks. The historian Gregory of Tours, writing centuries later, tells us of a man named Merovich, whose name would give rise to a dynasty. Merovich was the father of Childeric, and the grandfather of the great Clovis. These names are not just a part of history. They are the threads that weave together the story of the Merovingian kingdom. Childeric, like his father and grandfather, was a ruler of the Franks, but his path to power was not without its trials. He was known for his wantonness, a king who took what he wanted without regard for the consequences. The Franks, tired of his reckless behavior, drove him from power. Childeric fled to Thuringia, seeking refuge with King Bicinus and his wife, Baecina. Baecina was a woman of strong will and sharp mind. She saw in Childeric a man of potential, a leader who could guide the Franks to greatness. She left her husband and joined Childeric, bearing him a son whom they named Clovis. This child, born in a time of turmoil, would grow to be a great king and a warrior of legend. Meanwhile, in the Gallic provinces, a Roman general named Aegidius had risen to power. He was appointed master of the soldiers and became a formidable figure in the region. When the Franks drove Childeric from power, they turned to Aegidius as their new king. He ruled for 8 years, but the Franks were not content to be led by a Roman. They longed for a king of their own blood, a leader who understood their ways and shared their vision. Years passed, and Childeric's friend, who had stayed behind to smooth things over, finally sent the gold coin that was the sign for Childeric to return. With the coin in hand, Childeric marched back to the Franks, and they welcomed him as their king once more. The bond between Childeric and Baecina grew stronger, and their son Clovis flourished under their guidance. The world was changing. The Roman Empire, once a mighty force, was in decline. New powers were rising, and the Franks were among them. Clovis, now a young man, watched as his father navigated the complex world of alliances and conflicts. He learned the art of war and the art of leadership, preparing for the day when he would take the throne. In the year 481, Childeric died, and Clovis ascended to the throne. He was a king at a young age, but he was not alone. His mother, Clothild, was a devout Christian, and she saw in Clovis the potential to lead the Franks to a new era. She encouraged him to embrace the Christian faith, believing it would bring unity and strength to the kingdom. Clovis's first challenge came in the form of Syagrius, the last Roman king in Gaul. Syagrius ruled from the city of Soissons, a stronghold that stood as a symbol of Roman authority. Clovis, with the support of his kinsman Ragnachar, marched against Syagrius, determined to claim the land for the Franks. The battle was fierce, and in the end, Syagrius was defeated. He fled to the court of King Alaric of the Goths, seeking refuge, but Clovis was relentless. He demanded that Alaric hand over Syagrius, and the Gothic king, fearing the wrath of the Franks, complied. Syagrius was executed in secret, and the Franks took control of his kingdom. Clovis's victory at Soissons was just the beginning. He went on to wage many wars, each one expanding his power and influence. In the 10th year of his reign, he conquered the Thuringians, adding their lands to his growing kingdom. But his greatest challenge was yet to come. Clovis's marriage to Clothild was not just a union of love, it was a strategic alliance. Clothild, a Burgundian princess, was a woman of great faith and influence. She had witnessed the cruelty of her own family, the Burgundians, who had been followers of the Arian heresy. She saw in Clovis a man who could lead the Franks to a new era of Christian rule. Clothild's influence was not always welcomed by Clovis. He was still a pagan, a man of the old ways, and he was skeptical of the Christian faith. But Clothild was persistent. She spoke to him of a God who created the heavens and the earth, who gave life to all living things, and who could grant him the power to rule with justice and wisdom. She told him of the miracles and the teachings of Christ, and she urged him to see the error of his ways. The turning point came when their firstborn son, Ingomer, was baptized. Clothilde had adorned the church with hangings and drapery, hoping to move Clovis with the beauty and mystery of the Christian faith. The boy was baptized, but he died soon after, still wearing the white robes of his baptism. The loss was a blow to both parents, but it was Clothilde who saw it as a sign. She believed that God had taken her son to test her faith, and she remained steadfast in her beliefs. Clovis, however, was not yet convinced. He continued to worship the old gods, but the seeds of doubt had been planted in his mind. The Franks, too, were changing. Many of them were beginning to see the value of the Christian faith, and they looked to Clovis to lead them in a new direction. The storm that had marked Clovis's birth was just the beginning. The true storm was yet to come, a storm that would reshape the world and forge a new kingdom. Clovis stood at the threshold of a new era, ready to lead his people into the future. The king and queen were in a deep rift over the fate of their children. The queen had lost a son shortly after his baptism, which the king blamed on her faith. He was bitter and lashed out at her, saying that if the boy had been dedicated to the king's gods, he would have lived. The queen, however, remained steadfast in her faith. She thanked God for allowing her son to enter his kingdom and felt no grief, knowing that those who die in their baptismal innocence are cherished by God. Despite the king's doubts, the queen bore another son, Chlodomer, who was also baptized. When Chlodomer fell ill, the king was convinced he would die like his brother. But the queen prayed, and by God's will, the child recovered. This miraculous recovery did not change the king's mind about her faith, but it did not diminish the queen's conviction. The queen continued to urge the king to recognize the true God and abandon his idols. But the king remained stubborn, until a critical moment in a war against the Alemanni. The battle was intense, and the king's army was on the brink of annihilation. In his desperation, the king raised his eyes to heaven and wept, calling out to Jesus Christ. He promised to believe and be baptized if Christ would grant him victory. Miraculously, the Alemanni fled, and the king emerged victorious. He returned home and shared his experience with the queen, acknowledging that his victory was a sign from God. Moved by the king's change of heart, the queen arranged for the holy bishop Remigius to meet with Clovis. The bishop taught the king about the true God and the futility of worshipping idols. Clovis agreed to speak with his people, and to everyone's surprise, they all declared they would abandon their old gods and follow the God preached by Remigius. The baptism of Clovis and his people was a grand event. The streets were decorated, and the church was filled with the scent of incense and the glow of candles. Clovis, like a new Constantine, was baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Over 3,000 of his followers were also baptized, marking a significant shift in the kingdom. Tragedy struck when Clovis's sister, Albufledes, passed away. The king was deeply saddened, but Bishop Remigius wrote him a letter of comfort, reminding him that those who depart in faith should be celebrated rather than mourn. Another of Clovis's sisters, Lanticaldes, also converted to the faith, acknowledging the equality of the Son and the Holy Spirit with the Father. Around this time, Clovis became involved in a conflict with the brothers Gundobad and Godegisel, who ruled a kingdom along the Rhone and Seine rivers. Godegisel, seeking Clovis's help against his brother, promised to pay tribute. Clovis agreed and led his army against Gundobad. The two brothers, along with Clovis, met at the fortress of Dijon. Godegisel joined Clovis, and together they defeated Gundobad, who fled to Avignon. Fearing for his life, Gundobad sought advice from Aridius, a trusted advisor. Aridius pretended to defect to Clovis, offering to serve him faithfully. Aridius then convinced Clovis to accept a yearly tribute from Gundobad instead of pursuing him further. Gundobad agreed, and the conflict was temporarily resolved. However, Gundobad soon broke his promise and attacked his brother Godegisel, who was besieged in Vienne. With provisions running low, Godegisel ordered the city's poor to be driven out. Among them was an artisan who, resentful of being expelled, betrayed the city to Gundobad. The artisan led a force through the aqueduct, and the city was taken. Godegisel was killed, and his followers were exiled to Toulouse. Gundobad then reasserted control over the region, known as Burgundy, and established milder laws to prevent further conflict. Gundobad, recognizing the futility of his heretical beliefs, sought baptism but was hesitant to do so publicly. Bishop Avitus, a wise and eloquent man, urged Gundobad to openly acknowledge his faith. Despite Avitus's arguments, Gundobad remained stubborn and never publicly converted. In the meantime, Alaric, the king of the Goths, saw Clovis's growing power and sought a meeting. The two kings met on an island in the Loire, near Amboise. They discussed matters, shared a meal, and swore an oath of friendship. The meeting was a sign of the growing influence of the Franks in Gaul. However, not everyone was pleased with the idea of Frankish rule. Bishop Quintianus of Rhodes was driven from his city by those who accused him of supporting the Franks. Despite the opposition, the queen's faith and Clovis's victories continued to shape the destiny of the kingdom. After the Battle of Vouille, where Clovis defeated Alaric and the Visigoths, he continued his conquests and solidified his rule over much of Gaul. His next big victory came when he received the title of consul from Emperor Anastasius. This was a huge honor, and it showed that the Roman Empire recognized Clovis as a powerful leader. Clovis celebrated by giving generous gifts to the people of Tours, and he was hailed as consul and Augustus. He then moved his capital to Paris, where he established his new government. Around this time, Licinius became the new bishop of Tours. He was known for his piety, and had even visited the holy sites in Jerusalem. Licinius was the 8th bishop of Tours after the famous Saint Martin. Clovis, always looking to expand his kingdom, turned his attention to his kinsman, King Childebert. Childebert was old and had a bad leg, and his son was eager for power. Clovis secretly encouraged the son to kill his father, promising to support him. The son, tempted by the idea of ruling, arranged for his father's murder. But his plan backfired, and he was killed by Clovis's men while opening his father's treasure chest. Clovis then claimed Sigebert's kingdom and treasures for himself. The people of Cologne, seeing Clovis's power, quickly accepted him as their new king. Next, Clovis went after King Childeric, who had refused to help him in a previous battle. Childeric and his son were captured, humiliated, and eventually executed. Clovis took control of their kingdom and people. Clovis also dealt with Ragnachar, the king of Cambrai, who was known for his cruel and wild behavior. Clovis tricked Ragnachar's followers by giving them fake gold, and they betrayed their king. Ragnachar and his brother were captured and killed by Clovis. The betrayers later found out that the gold was fake, but Clovis told them that they deserved such a reward for their treachery. Clovis continued to eliminate any potential threats to his rule, including his own relatives. He even expressed sadness about not having any family to support him, but this was likely a trick to see if anyone else might be plotting against him. Despite his ruthless methods, Clovis was a successful ruler. He expanded his kingdom and brought much of Gaul under his control. He died in Paris in 511 at the age of 45, after ruling for 30 years. He was buried in the Basilica of the Holy Apostles, which he had built with his wife, Queen Clothilde. Clothilde, after her husband's death, moved to Tours and spent her life serving in the Basilica of St. Martin, living a virtuous and kind life. The death of Clovis marked the beginning of a new era for the Franks, as his kingdom was divided among his sons. But the story of Clovis's reign and the foundation of the Frankish kingdom would continue to shape the history of Gaul for generations to come. In the years following the death of King Clovis, his sons Theuderic, Chlodomer, Childebert, and Chlothar divided his kingdom among themselves. Each brother ruled a part of the vast territory their father had conquered. Theuderic, the eldest, already had a son named Theudebert, who was both skilled and brave. The brothers, known for their courage and strong armies, granted their sister in marriage to Amalaric, the king of Spain, along with a large dowry of treasure. One day, the Danes, led by their king Clotilde, sailed to Gaul and attacked Theuderic's land. They pillaged, took prisoners, and loaded their ships with spoils. Determined to defend his kingdom, Theuderic sent his son Childebert with a powerful army. Childebert defeated the Danes in a sea battle, killed their king, and brought the spoils back to shore. Meanwhile, in the land of the Thuringians, 3 brothers Theuderic, Hermanfrid, and Berthar ruled together. Hermanfrid, jealous of his brothers, plotted against Berthar and killed him. Hermanfrid's wife, Amalaberg, was a cruel woman who encouraged her husband to fight Theuderic. Hermanfrid, seeking help, allied with Theuderic. They defeated Theuderic and killed him, but Hermanfrid later broke his promise to share the kingdom with Theuderic. This betrayal led to a bitter enmity between them. Years later, Theuderic, still angry about Hermanfrid's betrayal, decided to attack him. He asked his brother Chlothar to join him, and promised to share the spoils. Theuderic gave a rousing speech to his army, reminding them of the past wrongs committed by the Thuringians. The Franks, eager for revenge, set out to war. The Thuringians, however, prepared traps by digging trenches covered with grass. When the battle began, many Franks fell into these traps, but they eventually overcame the Thuringians. Hermanfrid fled, and the Franks crossed the river unstrut over the bodies of the dead Thuringians, securing victory. Chlothar, one of the victorious kings, took Raedgund, the daughter of Berthar, as a captive and later married her. Raedgund, after suffering much, turned to God and built a monastery in Poitiers, where she lived a life of prayer and charity. During this time, Sigismund, the king of Burgundy, killed his own son, Sigeric, after being misled by his new wife. Sigismund, filled with regret, sought forgiveness at the monastery of Agon. Meanwhile, Chlodomer, another of Clovis's sons, listened to his mother, Queen Clothild, and launched a campaign against the Burgundians to avenge the death of his grandparents. Chlodomer captured Sigismund and his family, but despite the advice of the abbot Avitus, he had them killed and thrown into a well. Chlodomer then pursued Sigismund's brother, Chlodomer, but was tricked and killed by the Burgundians at the Battle of Veserance. Chlothar, Chlodomer's brother, married Chlodomer's widow Guntheuca, and took care of Chlodomer's sons. Back in Thuringia, Theuderic, still angry with Hermanfrid, invited him to a meeting and promised him safe passage. Hermanfrid came, and while they were talking on the walls of Zolpich, he fell to his death. Many believed Theuderic was responsible, but no one could prove it. While Theuderic was away in Thuringia, Childebert, another of Clovis's sons, was called to Auvergne by Arcadius, a senator. Childebert entered the city, but when he learned Theuderic was still alive, he left for Spain to help his sister, Clothild, who was being mistreated by her husband, Amalaric. Childebert's army cornered Amalaric, who tried to escape but was killed by a spear. With the death of Amalaric, Childebert returned to his kingdom, and the Franks continued to expand their power and influence across the lands they had conquered. The story of the Franks, with its twists and turns, comes to a close amidst the shadows of betrayal, greed, and the relentless pursuit of power. Childebert and Chlothar, driven by jealousy and fear, made a fateful decision that would forever change the course of their lives and the kingdom they ruled. Queen Clothild, staying in Paris, was oblivious to the dark plans her sons were hatching. She loved the sons of her late son Chlodomer deeply and wanted them to inherit their rightful place in the kingdom. Childebert, however, saw this as a threat. He feared that the young princes would one day claim the throne, and with it, a share of the power he and Chlothar held. In a moment of cruel calculation, Childebert sent a secret message to Chlothar, urging him to come to Paris for a meeting. The message was simple. They needed to decide the fate of the young princes. Chlothar, eager to maintain his share of the kingdom, agreed without hesitation. They met in Paris, and to avoid suspicion, Childebert spread a rumor that the meeting was to raise the young princes to the throne. Queen Clothild, believing this, was overjoyed. She sent the boys to the kings with food and drink, thinking they were about to be crowned. The moment the boys arrived, they were seized and separated from their guardians. Childebert and Chlothar then sent Arcadius to the queen with a pair of scissors and a naked sword. The message was clear: choose their fate. Arcadius presented the queen with the terrible choice. Should the boys live with their hair shorn, or should they die? Overwhelmed with fear and grief, the queen made a tragic decision. "If they are not raised to the kingship," she said, "I would rather see them dead than shorn." Arcadius, without giving her time to reconsider, returned to the kings with her answer. Chlothar, without hesitation, grabbed the older boy and cruelly killed him. The younger boy, seeing his brother's fate, fell at Childebert's feet, begging for his life. Childebert, moved by the boy's plea, tried to intervene. "I ask you, dear brother, let your generosity grant me the life of this boy. I will pay for his life whatever you say, only don't kill him." But Clothar's heart was hardened by ambition. He refused, and the younger boy met the same cruel end as his brother. The kingdom of Chlodomer was then divided between Childebert and Chlothar, solidifying their rule but at a terrible cost. The queen, once a symbol of love and unity, was left heartbroken and powerless. The young princes, who could have been a source of hope, were silenced forever. In the end, the kingdom was marked by the shadow of their deaths, a reminder of the price of power and the lengths to which men will go to secure it. The story of the Franks, with its tales of loyalty, betrayal, and ambition, is a testament to the human condition, where the choices we make can shape the world around us, for better or for worse.